You know what's strange? Some of the people who ignore messages the longest are not the people who care the least. Very often, they are the people who care too much. They see the message immediately. They read it. They think about replying. They even start forming the response in their head. And then they don't send it. Not because they're cruel, not because they're cold, not because they want to hurt anyone, but because in their mind, the message stops being a message. It becomes pressure. And that's the psychology behind this pattern. For some people, replying is not a simple social action. It feels like an emotional performance. They're not just answering a text, they're managing tone, managing timing, managing how they come across, managing the possibility of being misunderstood. And the more emotionally aware someone is, the more this can happen. Because they don't just think, I should reply. They think, how do I sound? Do I seem distant? Too dry? Too needy? Too late? Too awkward? Too uninterested? Too emotional? That's what makes something small become mentally heavy. Psychologists often connect this kind of behavior to avoidance-based coping. Not because the person doesn't care about relationships, but because the emotional cost of engagement starts to feel bigger than the action itself. In other words, the reply isn't being avoided because it's meaningless. It's being avoided because it means too much. And once that happens, time starts changing the emotional weight of the message. At first it feels easy, then a little late, then awkward, then guilty, then almost impossible. And this is where the loop begins. The longer you wait, the more pressure builds. The more pressure builds, the harder it feels to reply. And the harder it feels to reply, the longer you wait. What started as one unopened or unanswered message turns into a small psychological burden. And here's what makes this especially important. People who do this are often not socially careless. In many cases, they're the opposite. They are highly socially aware. They notice tone too much. They think about wording too much. They care too much about disappointing people. They imagine how the other person might interpret the delay. They overestimate how much meaning the other person will attach to every word. So instead of sending a quick, imperfect response, they wait for the right response. But the right response never comes, because the real problem usually isn't wording, it's emotional readiness. And that's where this gets deeper. A lot of people ignore messages when they don't feel like themselves. When they're tired, when they're low, when they're ashamed of their energy, when they don't want to explain their life, when they don't know how honest to be. A simple "how are you" can become overwhelming if the real answer is complicated, because now you have to choose. Do I tell the truth? Do I keep it light? Do I pretend I'm okay? Do I explain why I disappeared? Do I act normal? That's why texting can feel strangely intimate for some people. It's not just communication, it's exposure. Someone has reached into your space and now your mind feels like it has to produce a version of you to send back. And if you don't currently like the version of yourself you'd have to send, you delay. This is especially common in people with perfectionistic tendencies. Perfectionism doesn't only show up in work or achievement, it also shows up in communication, in the pressure to say things correctly, to sound warm enough, to be thoughtful enough, to not disappoint, to not be misread. So what looks like avoidance from the outside can actually be a combination of perfectionism, anxiety, guilt, and emotional overload. And sometimes there's another layer, resentment, because modern messaging gives people constant access to you, at any time, in any mood, no matter how drained you are. And some people don't actually want to be available that often, but instead of setting a clean boundary, they disappear. Not because disappearing is healthy, but because for a lot of people, avoidance becomes a boundary they never learned how to speak out loud. It's easier to ignore the message than to say, I care about you, but I don't have the energy right now. I want connection, but not constant access. I'm overwhelmed, and I need more space than I know how to explain. So silence becomes protection. But the problem is, silence usually protects the person in the moment, while damaging the relationship over time. And that's why so many people who ignore messages feel guilty the entire time they're doing it. They don't forget. They don't stop caring. They carry it with them. That's important to understand, because once guilt enters, the message changes. It's no longer just a reply. Now it feels like repair, like explanation, like damage control, and that emotional inflation is what traps people. So, what does this behavior actually reveal? Usually not disinterest. Usually it reveals one of a few things: an overwhelmed nervous system, fear of being perceived in the wrong state, perfectionism around communication, difficulty with boundaries, or shame around not being emotionally available enough. Sometimes all of them at once. And if that's true, then the answer is not simply be more disciplined. The answer is to reduce the emotional cost of replying, to make communication feel smaller, safer, more human. Not every response has to be perfect. Not every delay needs a perfect explanation. Not every conversation needs a polished version of you. Sometimes the healthiest reply is a very simple one. Sorry, I disappeared. I've been overwhelmed. I saw this, I just didn't have the energy. I wanted to reply sooner. That kind of honesty does something important. It removes performance. And when performance leaves, connection has a chance to come back. Because in the end, this pattern is rarely about not caring. More often, it's about caring while overwhelmed, wanting connection, but feeling unable to step into it. Wanting to reply, but feeling like replying requires a version of you that you don't currently have access to. And maybe that's the part people need to hear most. Ignoring messages for days does not automatically mean you are selfish, cold, or broken. Sometimes it means the emotional cost of being reachable has become too high. And healing that doesn't start with shame. It starts with understanding what replying has come to represent in your mind: pressure, guilt, exposure, expectation, performance, and slowly making it feel safe enough to become simple again. Because when communication stops feeling like a test, replying becomes possible. And when replying becomes possible, so does connection.